Hi, this is singer-songwriter Elizabeth Edwards. Welcome to Giving Voice to Recovery, a place we share ideas and experience for the purpose of inspiring you on your recovery journey. I am so glad you've joined me for this series of conversations with my dear friend Kristina Wandzilak. You may know Kristina from her book, The Lost Years, her work on TLC's groundbreaking show Addicted, or her television docu-series Codependent, which premiered on Lifetime and A&E. Kristina is credited with helping thousands of addicts and their families through her work as an international interventionist, and now joins me in a series of conversations about life, recovery, and coffee. Welcome to Coffee with Kristina. Button. So hey there, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Good to be here.
Yay. Took a little self-care vacation. Nice.
Yeah, just back from vacation. It's so nice to get away, but always it's hard to come back, or you just literally hit the ground running, and
yeah, re-entry is rough.
it really is. So but that's all right. So my head's spinning a little bit this morning, but getting the hang of it.
There you go. Just breathe your way into it. So today's coffee cup.
Well, I like that one.
You rock. Yeah. And you rock.
I don't have
that's half the problem right there, Kristina. You don't have your coffee. That's why you're having a rough re-entry.
Yeah. I'll have to take care of that after this. But anyway.
I'm telling you, sometimes when I'm like fumbling around, I know that it's just my lack of connection with my caffeinated state there. But anyway, I was hoping today, it is Valentine's Day on the day that we're recording this. It will go out after that. But what that prompted me to bring up, and just some of the things that I've been around some families that are really struggling with helping their loved one get into some recovery. And I really was in touch with the concept of self-love and self-esteem and the role that it plays in what happens during the active addiction, and then what happens in recovery and what's necessary. There's a certain amount of self-love to actually grab onto recovery. And that's been my experience. I wanted to get your take on that whole concept of self-love in recovery, and then enough self-love in our active addiction to actually receive help, and move from those self-destructive behaviors into a constructive, basically a reconstruction of our lives. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that? That's kind of my view of it, but
I don't know. But I'm curious your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, I'll go first. I had a little more time to think about it than you did, so that's only fair. Well, I actually think that recovery becomes really possible when we put together the pain of a bottom and enough hope and self-esteem to reach out for that recovery. That's the motivation that comes together in that moment of clarity, I think, on some level, along with some other things like, I can't do this, I'm powerless over this, and I need help in overcoming it. That's the other thing that's going on there. I think those two pieces have to come together, and I think they feel very at odds with each other. And in reality, it's I believe what's needed to shift. I think a lot of families that have the line, there's like a thread of addicted people, active addiction running in families. We see that. I'm sure you see that. I've seen it in my own family, and then many, almost every family I know of. I know there's the exceptions, but self-love can be, I think, a concept that doesn't fully get actualized in people because they're taking on and they're on a subconscious level, maybe taking on the shame, inherited shame over time. And what I mean by that is the not good enough voice. And I think that's one of the things that's really common with people that I hear over and over again is people's unresolved perfectionism, I do this to myself, beating myself up, not able to give ourselves grace, never good enough, taking on the pain and internalizing the pain of other people instead of recognizing ourselves as individuals that can love other people, but we don't have to process all their emotions and all of that kind of stuff. And I think there's these really blurred lines in these emotional spaces within a person that suffers from addiction. That's been my experience. And I really saw that working with a family, just as a friend over the weekend. And it really brought that home to me. And I thought, how do we get from that self-destruction, it's all my fault, I'm not good enough, I'm not worth it, who cares anyway, I don't care, that angry self-destructive thing that goes on. How do we start to detangle that family that's caught up in that web of shame and blame and self-destructive behaviors, if it's the active addict or the active codependent? That's what I see a lot of. And my take on the self-love piece is it's like rebuilding the foundation on a house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of self-awareness and a lot of other people modeling self-love and grace and giving ourselves grace. I'm still working on it 35 years into this deal. I'm still working on that one. But I think it's like remodeling, starting at the foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Knowing that God doesn't make junk, right?
Yeah, right. I haven't heard that in a long time. Okay, well, so that was a lot.
You asked for it, girl.
So interesting when you talked about hitting bottom and kind of that intersection of esteem and despair. I guess because I talk about that a lot myself. However, this is how I think I felt about it, right? Like when I hit bottom, it was really that moment when I realized that no one was coming to save me, that there was no one left to blame, and that I had so clearly and painfully done this to myself. And it was just a collapse of that whole internal construct that you and I have spoken about before. And it was only then, in that moment, when I realized no one was coming, that I could reach outside myself for help, which actually was the birthplace of my self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So at that bottom, I don't know if it was an intersection of esteem and despair. I think it was an intersection of complete annihilation internally, coupled with the despair of addiction. So I don't know. I guess my point is, if I had any love for myself at that time, I don't think I had any love for myself at that time. And I think the birthplace of it was in that moment when I reached out for help. But what I do know in regards to love is, although I hated myself through and through, there wasn't one part that I liked about myself, or I had just gutted myself through and through. But what I do know is that somebody showed me enough love along the way to make that call, as opposed to, I don't know, throwing myself off the bridge, literally and figuratively. That someone along the way in my life showed me enough love to reach out at that moment, then succumb wholly to addiction. And I know for myself in my life, of course, that was my mom and other people along the way, coaches and teachers and siblings, but I don't know, that I had that love somewhere. I think for myself, the love I have for myself truly came with time, as it just took time. I think staying sober one day at a time, is, by the way, like my first year sober was the greatest achievement of my life, and still probably is today, ultimately, right? Because everything else grew from that. Exactly. So I think getting that year, just one, it's like I gave my love for myself away one incident at a time, and I only got it back one incident at a time. right? Like literally you build self-esteem by doing esteemable acts.
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself that I also realized this. I think okay, I don't know how to articulate this, but the longer I've been sober, okay, I don't really know how to articulate this yet, so I'm just gonna fumble through it. But
I love your fumbles. Go, girl.
Yeah, I think, the longer I'm sober, the longer I realize that in the beginning of my recovery, I was so busy demonizing my addiction, right? Like you demonize drug addiction and the disease. And I just realized somewhere along the way, later in my recovery, by the way, like after the first 5 years, which I think the first 5 years of recovery are really kind of, I think people are still new, frankly. Mm-hmm. I told you that. I remember when Stephanie Brown told me that, and my first thought was like, fuck you, I'm 3 years sober. I got my shit together. Lady, what are you talking about? 5 years? Like, I just remember, because she's been sober, like, I don't know, 45 years or something.
And I think there's research that supports that.
That was her point. She's like, it's not a personal attack. It's just research, right? And one day you'll see that. And God, if she wasn't right. But anyway, my point is that I was so busy demonizing addiction, right? It's like so rigid in the beginning, that this is good and that is bad, and addiction is bad and recovery is good. And, it's just so polarizing and catastrophic. And I realized somewhere, after those 5 years, that if I'm so busy hating a part of myself, a relatively large part of myself and a large part of my story, if I'm so busy hating it and demonizing it, I'm never going to love myself, right? If I'm busy hating a part of me, I'm never going to love all of me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's where I start. It's like hard to articulate, but I just got busy kind of not making friends with my addiction, but maybe like kind of jumping in and learning about it, studying it. It's where my studies of addiction really began. How did this happen to me? Instead of just demonizing disease, but, how did it happen? How did I come by? And what's my family history? What do the genetics look like? Where does that play a part? Where does the psychology play? I just got busy. Instead of, like closing my eyes and looking away from it, just knowing that there was this monster in the closet, I guess I just started to shine a light on it. And the more I understood my addiction, the more I made peace with my addiction, the more I used my addiction to benefit others and step out of that shadow of shame and stigma that we talk about so much with Faces and Voices, right?
Yeah.
Stepping out of that stigma, I really learned to love myself. Yeah. I learned to be grateful for the gifts of my addiction. I'm kind of rambling now, but to be grateful for the gifts of my addiction. I received a lot of gifts through my addiction.
You've said some wonderful things. I just wanted to hear, I wanted to help you get that all out. Yeah. That's awesome. Now you said a lot of things. The first thing that I really heard and really could just resonate with me is compassion. Why compassion to me is the appropriate response to a person in active addiction. And at first, it's almost like you have to receive it from somewhere else to ever be able to get to the place where you can actually have self-compassion. That takes time, but receiving compassion from others. And I think that's why going to places where people have been there for a while and started to rebuild, you start to realize that, addiction is not about bad people trying to get good. It's about sick people who are trying to get well. And there's a huge difference there. Mm-hmm. And as a society, we do stigmatize all the behavioral health issues. And it's understandable because it's a very misunderstood disease.
Sorry.
Where'd you go? There you go. Oh, there you are.
Sorry. I don't know. I got a phone call. It was weird. I got a call and
oh yeah, sometimes that throws us off, but your halo is on, girl. Your angelic halo wanted to join this conversation about self-love.
Almost 10.
There you go. Well, yeah, your sunlight came up and gave you your halo. But yeah, I think that self-compassion comes after we learn to receive compassion just because we're a human being and we're suffering. And as a person in long-term recovery, what you mentioned with Faces and Voices and why that the mission of destigmatizing the substance use disorder and all the disorders that are around that, because there's some other behavioral disorders that are lined up with that. The reason that understanding education and really being a breaker of stigma, why that's so important is because of that piece, that compassion piece. A lot of people in the throes of active addiction, their ego is protecting them, and all you see is the anger and the blame and the shame and stuff. But underneath that, from you've been there, I've been there, there's a person that's literally dying in front of you. Okay. And that's why I think people like you and I, and people who understand that and have recovered from it, that's why we're the best people to be on the front line with them, to say, yeah, I get you. And underneath there is a very scared, shame-based person that's literally drowning in shame. And so compassion is that lifeline, compassion and understanding. And that takes somebody who's been there. And a lot of times there are some fabulous therapists, there are some fabulous people, professional people who totally understand this as well. And usually people drawn to that work have had some kind of life experience. And those are usually some of the best people to get in touch with, like you mentioned, Stephanie, who's lovely, by the way. She, people who understand that level of compassion, because there's none for that person. The level of shame and self-loathing and hatred, self-hatred is just amazing what's going on inside that person, no matter what you're seeing on the outside. And so that's the first big piece. The second piece that, well, I forgot about it already, so it must, if it's important, it'll come back. But that really struck home. Stigma, that was the other thing. Yeah, stigmatizing. And I think that's one of the main reasons I started this conversation with you and others, is to really get our voices out there, because this is an important message to people who are still in there and stuck in those systems where there's not an education, there's a lot of blame, there's a lot of misunderstanding of what you're actually dealing with. And I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination, and I know you don't believe this either, is that I'm not talking about breaking boundaries or laws or not taking responsibility for our actions. That was the piece. Acting our way back into right thinking, acting our way into self-esteem through self-esteemable behavior. That is key, because you can't think your way into self-forgiveness. You can't think your way into forgiveness from others. You actually have to do the work. You have to take the actions. And it's a huge process, and it's a process that absolutely pays off. And you mentioned that lastly, when you get to that place, one of my actual mission statement for this project is transforming pain into purpose. And I really believe that when you get on the other side of the early years of all that self-loathing and self-destructive behavior, is we get into a place where we can actually take our experiences and really help other people. And that's when you see the gifts. You see all the gifts. That's one of the big ones. It's not the only gift, but that's a huge gift in sobriety. I wouldn't trade my situation for anything at this point. And I felt very cursed in the very early days. So that's kind of my take. So many good things you shared.
I think families suffer, as you had mentioned too, just the family piece also, suffer with, terrible shame and
anger, shame,
low,
anger, all that.
low self-esteem or low love, right? Like just a low vibration of love for themselves and their families. And
I think but people get so beat up in the active
Right.
addiction family. And then, so there's just this huge amount of anger, shame, and blame going on. And I think everybody gets really beat down by it.
That's right. I mean, and as I said before, that's how you end up with low self-esteem, families, and not just, low self-esteem isn't just for the addict, but for the family too.
Absolutely. And I think that's how a lot of it gets passed on. People, there is a genetic component, but there's also definitely a socialization component. And if you grow up in a family where there's untreated addiction, but it doesn't look like active chemical dependency addiction, it might be untreated codependencies or untreated low self-worth because they were abused from a generational addiction. And that's actually what happened in my family was, the skipping of generations. There's great authors who write on that subject too. I'm getting ready to hopefully have an interview with one of them in the near future, because that's such an interesting piece. The opportunity for the family, I really think, and I have heard you talk about this, I'd like to get your take on it. I think there's a real opportunity for the family to take a look at themselves as individuals and say, how am I showing up in this? How am I taking care of myself in this? How is this affecting me? And what can I do to contribute to the wellness of the whole family? How do you address that when you're working with a family, Christine? I know you work with a lot of, not just the person, the individual. You often are working with an entire family. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself a family interventionist, really a family advocate, not just, an interventionist for addicts, but for family systems. And I work with families, exactly what you just said, really. I think the three most important questions that a family can ask themselves, right? And this is where so much of my work is. It's shifting the power in a family system, addicted family system, rests on the sickest member, right? So the addict is driving the family, the health of the family, the stability of the family, right? The addiction is driving that. The family isn't. So it's, I think, part of my work that's most difficult is helping families take the light, right, off the addict and shine it on themselves.
Yes.
And ask families, I think the three most important questions are, what is my part in this? What is my part? Not my fault, but families work as a puzzle, and every one is a piece. And so, in an addicted, codependent family, they're so busy figuring out the addict's piece, they bypass their own. So to turn that light around, ask themselves these three questions. What is my part in this? How has my life been affected by the disease of addiction and codependency and trauma? Just like you said, how has my life been affected? Not by the individual, but by the disease. How's my life been affected? Yeah. And what can I change in myself to benefit my own life and the life of my family? Three incredibly valuable questions, right? And it takes the light off the addict, because, right, addicts might get better, they might not. That's the truth of it. You might let go of the one that you love most, and they might not ever return. And so, right, if your life and your happiness, your well-being is contingent on the life of the addicted individual, it will result in many lost and unhappy years. So I do exactly that, Elizabeth. Ask yourself those three questions, right? What is your piece in your family system? How has your life been affected by the disease of addiction, codependency, generational illness? And what can you change in yourself to benefit your own life and the life of your family?
Yeah, and take care of yourself.
That's right.
Yeah. And
does
also,
that make sense? Like,
it makes. I know like 10 people I'm going to send this video to, right off the top of my head, like today. Absolutely. I think getting the focus, not to be self-centered, not in a self-centered way, but in a personal responsibility way. I am responsible for my inner world. I'm also responsible for my actions, which affect my outer world. I cannot control another person, but I can control myself. I didn't cause this in this particular individual, but I can be part of the solution by working on myself. And I can also, I can't control, I can't cure it, but I can show up for the healing. I can show up for the healing for myself, and that can't not help your loved one.
Right.
And it all feels so counterintuitive when you're in it.
It's so counterintuitive. It is.
That's why I always say get support. And if that's in the form of a family interventionist or a therapist or a treatment center or some other really good support, 12-step programs, obviously, there's always, I don't know how people, I always say, if your loved one had cancer, would you try to cure it at home?
Right.
And I know way more people who've died from addiction. I mean, a lot of people die from cancer too, but there's a lot of people who die from addiction. So take care of, get the help you need, because it's a really big shift. But it's a shift that is miraculous when you make it, and it's amazing. And it happens every day. Recovery does work. Recovery does happen. It also might not happen the way you want it to, when you want it to, and with who you want it to, but it does work for many, many people.
That's right. It does work.
You are just angelic today, girl. I love you dearly,
girl.
and I hope you have a terrific day. Thank you as always, Kristina. I love our conversations. And yeah, girl, you need to go find some more caffeine. Our little
I always appreciate your time. I'm going to go get my caffeine, and I will see you next week.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Take care. Bye. Bye.